Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, and all knowledge belongs to God. The knowledge was here long before you were born, and the knowledge will be here long after you're gone. I have published the update on the movements of Netanyahu's army in Gaza and Lebanon, the Black Year of Gaza. I previously, or about a month ago, put out the final report on October of 2023 through October of 2024. And I've published the day before yesterday, November of 2024, along with the end of October of 2024. And yesterday I published December of 2024. So we have also published this week the history of the world economy, and we are continuing with the project on the secret history of the world, the secret history of mankind. So today we will continue with the secret history of the economy. So it is so remarkable that the world economy essentially began 500 years ago, and that 1,000 years ago, the first ship managed to cross the European Strait to Africa, which is a 9-mile water channel. And that 500 years ago, the Europeans made their first voyage across the oceans of the world to get to India in an effort to bypass the Middle East. And at that time, there was a water channel from the Nile River in Egypt to the Red Sea, but it was unnavigable because of the dependence on the winds for powering a ship. The wind powered the ships 500 years ago, and the wind powered the ships 200 years ago. And this is how it went. So I will describe all of this, and we will end at the year, it was 200 years ago, the years of 1800. It essentially was 100 years ago when it was 1890, and this was the decade of genocide in India. So 1800s is hundreds of millions are genocided in India, and this is a direct and fundamental connection with the world economy. So, and then we end at around 1900 when there is a new technology developed, the combustion engine, and it transforms the world economy. Essentially, um, there's like an explosion of conscience and technology. And that was year 1900, which we had discussed in the history of the engine, and we will continue to connect it into the history. So in this history, these groups came from this area here in Europe, and they finally made it across this strait, and they had difficulties sailing down the coast of Africa, and the things that you could get from here and to bring to Europe were immeasurable. It was a fortune, and they had difficulty getting those ships down because until they developed this triangular lateen sail, they were not able to face the wind. So they must travel with the winds of the ocean, or they must have this sail to steer it. And they didn't have it in 1400, um, but they developed it, and then they began to sail against the wind down the shores of Africa, where they established like a post in cities along the way, and they always marked it with a stone pillar at the port or the beach, and they would put a crucifix, a cross on it to signify that their all of their ships knew that this was a safe area, or this was a connected to the trade path. So in the first voyage to India, the first voyage to India, they, because they must travel with the wind, they left port and crossed the Atlantic with the path of the wind over to Brazil. This took about 3 months. They replenished in Brazil, and then they sailed across the South Atlantic Ocean out to the tip of Africa. When they got to the tip of Africa, they needed to follow the winds and come around, taking the shore here up to the Horn of Africa. And when they reached the Horn of Africa, following the favorable seasonal winds, they crossed over the Arabian Sea out to where they generally came, well, they came to the top corner of India near Pakistan. And the economic history is intensely connected with the geography that has shaped mankind. This is the biggest geographical structure on Earth. It's the Himalaya mountain range, and it has a plateau on its north side. So essentially, this chemical geographical or yeah geographical chemical reaction pushed up all of this in a great chemical formation, and all of this plateau raised up to the high altitudes, and all of the life-giving chemicals and minerals were um, magnetized to the south face, and this is where you will find the four mighty rivers of the Himalayas, the mightiest rivers on earth, which is the foundation of the power in the world economy. And they are the Indus River, which comes from the plateau down the face of these 15,000-foot mountains and into this valley, and you can see it far in the satellite view all the way down here. There is the river Ganges that starts here at the plateau. It comes down the face of the mountains in just rivers upon rivers down all across the face, like a million tears. And it comes across the face of the valley of the Himalayas, and it empties down into this in a million channels down into the ocean. And the river, the Yangtze River, it comes from just handfuls of rivers flowing down the plateau and across the face of the mountain range down into the aquifers here in the west of China, across and down into the port of Hong Kong. And the last river is the Yellow River, and it goes from the face here um, in North China across from the Korean Peninsula, and it goes across the valley and up the face of into the plateau and curves back around for hundreds of kilometers. So we will be recording over several days' time to bring to you all of the information. In the name of God, who is on the side of the people of Gaza, may God protect them. And God is on the side of the freedom for the people of Syria. We're unable to doubt it. Fortune telling from a world without ships and the four mighty rivers of the Himalaya mountain range. We will continue to document the Black Year in Gaza from where we left off. We will provide a report of November 2024 and December of 2024 so that you may see this forest and not focus on one of the trees. Today we continue the secret history of the world with this description of the birth of the world economy, which happened 500 years ago. A world economy that is 500 years old. It's an attribute that is not well known, and certainly the professionals in economics have lived in ignorance of this history, which entirely defines who they are. There's nowhere in the world you can construct a more energetic trade economy than the rivers of this Himalaya mountain range. You could not make a massive city without a river to replenish the wells. You could never make multiple cities of massive size in close proximity. Anywhere else in the world, you could not make a trade network anywhere more massive and consolidated in location than at the southern base of the great Himalaya mountain range. Four massive river systems flow from the Himalayas with endless number of branches. The branches cover every part of the south side of the mountain range for 2,000 kilometers from west to east, the territory of Pakistan, India, and China. The river networks are the widest, deepest, longest rivers on the planet. The number of deep and wide interconnected rivers is exclusive to the geographical phenomenon of Asia. The roof of the world is the mountain range with a plateau on the north side, which, due to its elevation, is a water engine. The elevation generates water constantly and channels it down the south face of the mountain range. Trillions of gallons in fresh water, hundreds of rivers, winding like a bed of snakes for thousands of kilometers. The most fluid and sophisticated water network on the planet, South Himalaya. The first mighty river of the Himalaya is the Indus River. The Indus River feeds twice the number of people than the population of all of Russia. The Indus River provides more life than the Dnieper, Don, and Volga rivers combined. 250 million people are in the influence of the water of the Indus River. 30 million live upriver in megacities at the base of the mountains. 30 million live in megacities of the central plain of the riverbed. 30 million live at the river delta in megacity ports. The Ganges River is the second mighty river system of the Himalayas. The headwaters of the Ganges start at elevations of over 10,000 feet on the roof of the world, the Tibet Plateau. The Ganges River headwaters are within a few hundred kilometers from the headwaters of the Indus River. The Ganges River is the biggest river network of all of India. The west shoulder of the Himalaya Mountains, having these two rivers, is feeding water to more life of the planet than several other continents combined. Hundreds of millions of people live in megacities along the Ganges River. The rise of India is embedded with the Indus River and the Ganges River. At the far east shoulder of the Himalaya mountain range is the third and lastly the fourth of the four mighty rivers of the Himalayas. A handful of rivers stream down the mountain sides and merge together to form the head of the third mighty river of the Himalayas. The Yangtze is the third mighty river of the Himalayas. Its river head is feeding from a spring under the Himalayas. The Yangtze River has 100 rivers feeding it from the north to the south, from the mountainsides running thousands of kilometers to the river delta at the ocean shore. Hundreds of millions of people live in the megacities on the banks of the Yangtze: Chongqing, Wuhan, Shanghai. The fourth mighty river of the Himalayas is the Yellow River. Hundreds of millions of people live along the hundreds of rivers connecting to the waters of the Yellow River. 100 million live along the flood banks and river systems of the Yellow River in megacities: Xi'an, Zhengzhou, and in the sister rivers, Beijing, Tianjin. The east shoulder of the Himalayas sheds an unlimited amount of fresh water for an unlimited time to the sleekest, most interconnected water systems on the planet. These are the four mighty rivers of the Himalayas, feeding half of the planet and bearing economic power to steer the destiny of mankind. The Indus River System, the Ganges River System, the Yangtze River System, and the Yellow River System. There is evidence of water transport for 20,000 years of mankind's history. 4,000 years ago, it is the year 2000 BCE, and the first urban places of India are along the Indus at Harappa, Mohenjo, Rajasthan, Gujarat. There is not more than 40,000 people in the largest city. The cities become big because they lay along a river network. It is the most extensive trade network known to man 4,000 years ago. These river systems, which allowed the trade network, can only be compared to the river systems in China. The growth of India began along the Indus River system, and the growth of China began along the Yellow River system. The power of the Indus River system was paired with the Ganges River system. The state of India was forged by pairing of these two rivers. The power of the Yellow River system was paired with the Yangtze River, and the state of China was forged from these two river systems. After 4,000 years, the power of these countries are derived from those water arteries to this day. 3,000 years ago, the largest cities of India derived their water from the ore-rich valley range of mountains. They developed metalworking with bronze and copper. Men did not wander the forest alone because there are bad people hidden in there. 3,000 years ago, a man named Buddha told the people of India that no man is free of suffering, even when his face looks stoic. Buddha told the people of India to have respect for humanity, to rise above any feeling of hatred for life, and do not indulge in retaliatory thinking. 3,000 years ago, iron was found in the Indo-Ganges plain. Romans came with horses and Roman coins. Aryans came to India giving cows as if they were a form of cash. The biggest trade was rice. The gods are the gods of fire, sun, and death. 3,000 years ago, man traveled with one-man canoes. A big city could only be favorable if a big river is there which the people can travel. The biggest river systems in the world are in China and India because rivers are a byproduct of mountains. The mountains always separate the green and lush valleys on one side, and all the best soil is there. Mountain ranges always have a plateau on one side where it's higher elevation overall and very infertile, with many disconnected lakes. 2,000 years ago, Egypt had made 3 military expeditions to Byblos, Lebanon. An Egyptian port was established to export cedar timber for shipmaking. 500 nautical miles to Egypt, leaving Egypt July through September to follow the winds, and returning in March and April. If attempting to return in December, the ship must have oars because of the strong headwinds. Egypt adapted the hull and tongue joints for fitting timber into shipbuilding and used these larger ships for sailing the Red Sea. Egypt constructed the first lighthouse known to man at the primary entrance of the Nile Delta. It was 400 feet tall and made of white marble. Soon, many lighthouses were constructed on the Mediterranean Sea, and Egypt forged a canal from the Nile to the Red Sea. 2,000 years ago, the Empire of Persia made his first conquest to India to retain control of the land, and shortly after, the Romans followed, and they demanded the loyalty of India's kings. 2,000 years ago, gunpowder was invented in China, and the technology of cannons began to be used. The sailcloth is linen and papyrus. The ship must have oars to travel against the wind. Trades are gold, ivory, ebony, skins, cattle, sandalwood, copper, tin, and cedar logs. 1,000 years ago, the Islamic sultanates in Pakistan take control of India. The English crossed the water channel at the Mediterranean Sea for the first time. Venice and Genoa of Italy had a monopoly of all trade from Asia to Europe via a land route named the Silk Road. England had 20 ships. The Portuguese developed a new ship named the Caravel. It is the first technology that can sail toward the wind. Every year the ships returned from India and the traders became the richest men of Europe. 1324. Europeans know that North Africa has a river of gold and they bring loads of gold from Mecca. In 1385, the Mediterranean Sea is named the Green Sea of Darkness by the Arabs. 1413. Europeans attack Ceuta, Morocco, the flower of Africa, to establish a gateway for trade. 1400, and this is 600 years ago. The caravel travels down the west shore of Africa, establishing many ports and marking them with a cross symbol on a pillar along the beach. Taller ships named carracks are developed to travel the world, and by 1480, cannons were attached to the ships to defend from pirates along the 9-month journey, because before the cannons, the only way to defend against pirates is to smash your ship into the other ship. 500 years ago, the population of England was 4 million, and the population of India was 110 million people. India produced the saltpeter for the gunpowder industry and opium for medicine. They traded heavily with China to obtain silk and porcelain. All of this was sent to Europe as a payment to the king, a tributary payment from his vassal. They named themselves the East India Company. The East India Company is the first world trade network of mankind. The Silk Road connected China on a land route to the north shore of the Mediterranean Sea. The Silk Road is a regional trade network. As the trade network of the East India Company became sophisticated, the Chinese quickly understand what it means to have world trade. There is nothing that can rival the distance and complexity of the trade network of the East India Company to reach from one side of the world to another side of the world. 500 years ago, the year is 1488. The Portuguese Empire are the first to get a ship around Africa. 1498. 4 vessels travel around the Cape of Good Hope to India. England was 2 million people. Columbus begged for ships and money to find a new passage to India, and near India, the Spice Islands, traveling west instead of east. 500 years ago, the Europeans along the west shores of Europe made the first successful voyage by sea to the Far East. They went there with a determined purpose, working at the fastest pace possible. The purpose of Europe was to get access to the powerful economy in the Far East to cut out the Middle East from the journey. Europe forged the first route to bypass the Middle East. They were willing to go out of their way and sacrifice anyone's life, as the voyage required many men to surrender their life. The Europeans were bloodthirsty for a way around the Middle East in order to exclude the Middle East from trade. Europe was so thirsty, they took 100-foot-long sailboat across the Atlantic Ocean to Brazil, and then back across the Atlantic Ocean, following the trade winds of the ocean to the tip of Africa. The 15 sailboats rounded the tip of Africa, following the shore north until they reached the Horn of Africa. From the Horn of Africa, they relaunched their sailboats across the Indian Ocean. When they reached India, they used unspeakable violence to subdue the kings of the Indian city ports into trade agreements. One by one, down the shores of India from north to south. In return for his cooperation, each king was promised more money than he would ever know, and if he did not say yes, he was killed. The Europeans were ferocious and barbaric in getting access to India. Where they did not get cooperation, they burned and blasted to rubble. The first technology for economic power is the sailboat. Immediately, the cannon technology was added to ensure the likelihood of getting back across the two oceans to Europe. Every port along the shores of West India and the east and west shores of Africa were set with a crucifix to mark it as part of a trade route. 400 years later, it is the year 1900. The leaders of the world learn of a new technology named the combustion engine, and the fate of the world lays in the control of gas. The leaders begin a race for iron mining and gas extraction. The warm, shallow waters of the Arabian Sea were the place where the gas was located. Suddenly, the savage hatred of the Europeans had to be reversed, and they fought Turkey for control of the Middle East. They wanted direct access to the trade, and they wanted to exclude everyone along the way. This is the foundation of trade. Trade means to go to the other side of the world and to get resources. 400 years ago, it's the year 1600. The population of India is 100 million people. It was the only place in the world that had a city with 3 million people, other than China. India had several cities of 1 million people, and you could not find this number of people in one place anywhere in the world other than China at this time. The river system of the Himalayas makes two different river valleys, India and China. Each has massive rivers that extend for thousands of kilometers and branch into massive networks of rivers. There's nowhere in the world with anything near to the size of these river systems in breadth and depth and length. 1600. Four ships from England make their first voyage to the spice markets. 36 merchants and donors had given £100 to £300. The total for the voyage was £11,000 investment. Lord Clive told Shah Alam in India to sign a contract to hand over 3 provinces, and he returned 2 years later in 1603 with lots of pepper. There was a plague outbreak in England when he returned, and it killed Queen Elizabeth. King James rises. They next sail the next year in 1604. 2,000 men die along their voyages in the next 10 years, and they lost many ships in the next 10 years. The survival rate of the crew was very low. In 1608, they sailed to Surat. In 1613, they established a factory at Surat, which is a trading post. A factory would be their trading post. And this is at Surat, India. The average voyage is 16 months. 1621, the law of standing orders of the East India Company is established, and this designates how the money for each voyage is to be acquisitioned. So to say they need money to get this ship and crew to India, and whoever wanted to invest in the purchases for the ship and invest in purchases that they would obtain from India could give a sum of money, and he would receive a profit in return. And so they invited the businessmen of England to participate in the establishment of the company. And so it's 9 years later, and there's famine in West India. In 1639, they begin building their ships in India at Bombay. In 1640, the English and the Dutch, they stopped fighting for control of Spice Islands because the English are delegated Manhattan in USA. The Mughal Empire from Mongolia and the plateau did not have a navy, and therefore they could not prevent the shipping trade or fight it. From 1613 to 1700, 5,000 ships make the voyage to India and bring 1.5 million import goods back to Europe. So this is the 1600s. So from 1613 to 1700, the 1600s. By 1700, the English government decides to put a 35% import tax on goods from the East India Company in to control the power that the company had over England and the economy. The domestic wool market was in an uproar because of the losses in profit due to the competition with the sale of cotton from India. The cost of making English wool was 20 times more expensive than India's cotton. In 1701, unfinished white cotton was sold in bulk to England to stimulate a domestic printing industry. In 1711, 1 million yards of cotton had been printed in England. From 1700 to 1725, the East India Company exports 20% of India's productions. 1739, Safavids from Iran come to India with camels and swivel guns mounted on camelbacks. 1 million men with spears, with armor-piercing guns. Iran attacked the Mughals, and after 60 days, leaves with 8,000 carts of gold. Iran emptied the treasury of the Mughals, taking 6 generations of India's wealth. Each city of India becomes a kingdom on its own, and the central power or the unifying um, economic connection disintegrates. 1755, 40,000 sepoys were conscripted by the army for the Army of India. So they are paid, they're Indian men paid by the East India Company to be the art to as employed as the Army of India. So the East India Company is the ruling, is the king of India. In 1799, 200,000 sepoys had been employed by the East India Company. In 1769, so these are the 1700s, 200 years, 300 years ago, 1700s, and this is 1769. Famine in Bengal kills 10 million people. By 1 year later, this massive famine in Bengal had killed half of the population of all of Bengal, and the plantations had no workers. The company said that it's now bankrupt because they cannot produce. In 1774, a couple years later, the Parliament of England come to in with a fake rescue. They said that they needed to help the company give back money, give back because they had no profits. So they had to give back all of this money that the men of England, those businessmen of England, had been giving their money to East India to have a part in the economy. And now this will not be happening because the government is going to take this share of ownership. So to do this, the English Parliament agrees to give a big, massive amount of money to the East India Company because of this bankruptcy due to the genocide of Bengal. And we described in the trade from East India Company that they had 100% profit. They were taxing the people of India. They were rationing to the people of India, and they were killing the people of India. And they were making 1,000% profit, thousands of percentages of profit. This banker bailout was a smokescreen for the payment of a massive sum of money to the owners of the East India Company at the expense of the Parliament of England, and the famine continues for a century. 1783, famine in Chalsa kills 11 million people. 1791, famine in Doji Bora kills 11 million people. In 1780 to 1830, the technology of the water wheel, mills, flying shuttle, spinning jenny, and water frame allow England to compete with the price of textiles from India. By 1817, tax collectors from East India Company are still riding elephants around the city, door to door, collecting taxes. The East India Company no longer brought gold from England to pay for goods to trade. The company made such a profit in India, it could export shiploads at zero cost. The East India Company sold opium illegally in China for a high price. They used the profit to buy tea in China. The tea could be exported to Boston, USA at zero cost. 1820, the government in England resolves to take a 50% share in the ownership of the East India Company, and therefore East India becomes an arm of the state. The company flag is the flag of the United States with a British flag in the top left corner, replacing the 50 stars, which represent the 50 states of USA. In 1837, famine in Agra kills 1 million people. 1857, 130,000 troops from Punjab marched to Delhi, India, to destroy the East India Company. The walls around the city of Delhi are blocked. Every male over 16 years old is executed by musket fire, and Delhi endures a year of massacres until the company is taken over. In 1860, famine in Upper Doab kills 2 million people. In 1865, famine in Orissa kills 5 million people. In 1868, famine in Rajputana kills 2 million people. In 1876, famine in South India kills 10 million people. In 1896, famine in India kills 16 million people. And in 1900, 100 years ago, famine in India is killing 10 million people. Plantations use slave labor. The main exports of India are cotton, opium, and indigo. The Indians cannot afford to purchase food. The Indians are given ration tokens via work camps. The men lived in dormitories and endured very hard work. And in the year 1900, the past 100 years, India has transformed through the combustion engine technology. The past 100-year transformation of India is deeply connected with the sister river systems in China. The combustion engine technology has developed radically in China for the past 100 years, forming a core of the world trade economy. The rise of the engine brought upon mankind 3 world wars over gas. The history of the engine describes the economic history for the past 100 years, hand in hand. The secret history of the engine power to control humanity, the race for gas, and China is the key to World War III. Your loving daughter, Catherine L. Wan, written in December of 2024. And this is the history of the world economy. As you see, it was begun when there was a trade route established from Europe to India. This is when the world trade truly began. It was 500 years ago. It was a cross world journey. It, it sacrificed thousands upon thousands of lives to voyage, and it killed hundreds of millions to extract the wealth of India. These genocides occurred heavily from 1770 through 1850 and straight up to the end of 1800. So 200 years ago was the black century of India, full of genocide with a massive extraction of wealth out of India. And as I described in the history of the engine and the history of the combustion technology, that by the end of 1800, when the combustion engine rises, the genocides turn to China. China rises like a dragon in 100 years with this engine technology roaring and flying and just shooting up with this mechanical power, and it transforms all of life. It's the history of the world economy in China from 1900 to now, 100 years, and it was preceded by this secret history of the world economy in India. It is a new history. It is a young world, and it is a young world economy that we live in. And this has entirely placed back into perspective these situation that we now have in the world. This world economy is our destiny on the planet, and it is our rights, it's our inheritance, and we will continue with the recording or the publishing the videos for the description of the history for Gaza because this activity of Netanyahu's army is so deeply entrenched with that history of that world economy. So, Allahu Akbar.